Yashodanandana Braj Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braj Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanitari Yamuna Tira Vanitari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braj Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braj Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanitari Yamuna Tira Vanitari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braj Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braj Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanitari Yamuna Tira Vanitari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Iskon Guruvin ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Shukoti Nitai Mai Prashishi ki jai, Gaur Premanandi ki jai. Reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, Preaching in America, Part 2. While touring his movement in the West, Srila Prabhupada felt satisfied that it was growing stronger Opposition was also growing, but he took that as a sign, another sign of ISKCON's authenticity. His original plan was still intact, and on this tour he had been pursuing it. America had a chance of becoming Krishna conscious. At least he and his disciples should try for that. If they succeeded, then the whole world could be uplifted by that transcendental influence. Prabhupada liked preaching in America. Mostly my students are American, he had said, and they helped me very kindly push on this movement. But one man in the San Diego crowd had shouted back that he wanted more sex than was allowed in Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada's estimation was that Americans had good hearts, but that for want of Krishna consciousness, they were becoming completely confused, frustrated, and degraded. Srila Prabhupada had come first to America in 1965 to plant the seed of Krishna consciousness. That he had done. Now, with dozens of centres across the country and many others around the world, he was realising that his ambitions were not going unfulfilled. He also accepted that to make Krishna consciousness the dominant force in America and the world was something he might not see in his lifetime. It is not one man's work, he had said, and he asked everyone, Americans, Indians, and all world citizens, to take part in distributing Lord Chaitanya's mercy. Only a rare few came forward to help him. However, and he worked with them. Touring therefore was but another attempt at making his organisation as strong as possible while it was within his power to do so. Actually, he was living for others, and he didn't think he would live much longer. He wanted to continue touring, building ISKCON, saving as many lost souls as possible, and he wanted to impress upon his sincere followers and upon others who would read his books that every human being should take up the same work and live for the benefit of others by distributing Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Is that text 13? Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
I'll just see the Sanskrit. Pratishu cha mukta bhavena tatra tatra vishaktamati pranaya bhara ridhaya karpanayata skandena vahati evam utsanga urasi Chadyaya palayan madham param avapa. What patishtu on the forest paths. Cha also. Mukta bhavena by the childish behavior of the deer. Tatra tatra here and there. Vishaktamati whose mind was too much attracted. Pranaya with love. Bhara loaded. Ridhaya whose heart. Karpanyat cause of affection and love. Skandena by the shoulder. Udvahati carries. Evam in this way. Utsange sometimes on the lap. Arasi on the chest while sleeping. Ja also. Hadaya keeping. Upalayan fondling. Mudam pleasure. Paramam very great. Avapa he felt. Translation. While entering the forest, the animal would appear very attractive to Maharaj Bharat due to its childish behavior. Maharaj Bharat would even take the deer on his shoulders and carry it due to affection. His heart was so filled with great love for the deer that he would sometimes keep it on his lap, or when sleeping on his chest. In this way he felt great pleasure in fondling the animal. Please repeat. When entering the forest, the animal would appear very attractive to Maharaj Bharat due to its childish behavior.
due to its childish behavior.
Maharaj Bharat would even take the deer on his shoulders
Maharaj Bharat would even take the deer on his shoulders
and carry it due to affection.
and carry it due to affection.
His heart was so filled with great love for the deer
His heart was filled with great love for the deer.
that he would sometimes keep it on his lap
He would sometimes keep it on his lap
or when sleeping on his chest.
or when sleeping on his chest.
In this way, he felt great pleasure in fondling the animal.
In this way, he felt great pleasure in fondling the animal.
Purport by Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Maharaj Bharat left his home, wife, children, kingdom, and everything else to advance his spiritual life in the forest. But again, he fell victim to material affection due to his attachment to an insignificant pet deer. What then was the use of his renouncing his family? One who is serious in advancing his spiritual life should be very cautious not to become attached to anything but Krishna. Sometimes, in order to preach, we have to accept many material activities, but we should remember that everything is for Krishna. If we remember this, there is no chance of our being victimized by material activities. Om Jnanatimidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmritanyena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. When entering the forest, the animal would appear very attractive to Maharaj Bharat due to his childish behavior. Maharaj Bharat would even take the deer on his shoulders and carry it due to affection. His heart was so filled with great love for the deer that he would sometimes keep it on his lap or when sleeping on his chest. In this way, he felt great pleasure in fondling the animal. So just to recap, Maharaj Bharat, he's found this deer, baby deer, in the forest, and the mother of the deer has just died. So Maharaj feels compassion upon the deer and feels it's his duty to raise the deer and look after the deer and protect the deer from danger. And so that's what Maharaj Bharat does. He begins to raise the deer as is like his own child, like his own son. And he gives up his rules and regulations gradually and neglects his worship of the Lord. And after a few days, he forgets everything about the spiritual advancement. And it seems quite extreme that in a few days he forgot all his spiritual meditation, because he wasn't just a beginner in devotion service, he was actually experiencing ecstasy. He was on the level of Bhav. He was experiencing ecstatic symptoms. So it seems very unusual that somebody on that level could fall down to, to become attached to an insignificant deer. But that's what Bhagavatam does. It uses extreme examples to kind of drive home some important lessons to learn. And for example, this one is like misdirecting ourselves by attachment. Through different stories, Srimad Bhagavatam describes that, how living entities become distracted from the real goal of life by some temptation or by some attachment. So Bharat Maharaj protecting deer was fine, but because he started thinking that protecting the deer was more important than his own spiritual life, than his own sadhana, then that's what happened. But the problem was that whatever mood of devotion he had for the Lord he started to have that for the deer. For example, he says, he started to think that, the earth is so fortunate to have the footprints of the deer. It's more fortunate than me. Things like this is like all that devotion he had for the Lord has been misdirected to the deer now. So he's thinking that he's taking the deer as like Krishna, his deity. So that's why it's very important that we have to choose, because all souls have free will. So we all have the free will to choose what we need to do, but the free will needs to be used properly. And so here we see that in the beginning, Maharaj had Bharat Maharaj had the free will, and he chose the renounced order of life. He gave up his family, friends, his kingdom, his wife, children, everything, all his wealth, opulence. And so that was his free will. He chose to do that. And then when he goes to the forest, he still has free will, but then he misused his free will and he became attracted to a deer. And so we have to be really consistent, that we have to choose the right path, right thing in life. We have to continue through our Krishna consciousness to not be tempted by the wrong things. And the Acharyas explain that this particular circumstance came about upon Bharat Maharaj because of his past life karma. So it's like there was something in his past life that this came about due to that. And then, so in the same way, from our past life karma, we may get certain temptations in this life, and but it may come that when we're the most vulnerable, and that will take us away from our devotional service. So we have to be very careful. We have to resist these temptations, and that way we have to really be focused on our sadhana. We have to be very conscious and beware that Maya can come at any time and take us away from our devotional service. So we can see from this example that this wasn't somebody on the platform of, Bhajana Kriya or Narta Nivriti. He was on the level of Bhava, but still, even on that level, he fell down. So what about us? We're still trying to get to that stage. So that's why we need devotional safeguards. We need Bharat Maharaj. He didn't have the association of devotees. He didn't have the association of a spiritual master. He had nobody, and so when he became distracted, there was nobody to tell him, look, I think you're spending a bit too much time on the deer. You're forgetting your meditation. It's a bit, you should actually start meditating again or something. There would have been some sort of advice given to him by devotees, and that way he would have been protected. He would have thought, okay, yeah, that's right. I'm going off track here, so I better get back on track. But there was nobody, and that's why he became, susceptible to this temptation, and he continued without any regard for his spiritual life. He just continued doing this. So sometimes, we can learn, as sadhakas, we can learn from this that we try to make sure we're not cultivating attachments to trivial things, within the realm of bhakti, like we may be performing devotional service, but we may be becoming attracted or attached to trivial things and unnecessary things that can take us away from devotional service if we cultivate that attachment for these things. And so being in association of devotees is a very good way of being safeguarding against these setbacks. And sometimes we may renounce, we renounce the material world and we come to bhakti, we come to devotional service, but then we become attached to some like other things, like attachment to name, fame, position, prestige, so then, and by that we become distracted by the purpose of for the purpose of remembering Krishna. So we have to be very careful we don't become attached to other things apart from Krishna. So and that's why Srila Prabhupada wanted us to, previously in the previous yugas, people went into the forest when they became vanaprasthas or sannyasis, and they went to the forest to perform austerities. But in this age, it's not recommended. And that's why Srila Prabhupada wanted us to have devotional communities where devotees could come together and perform devotional service together so that we could have that association and be safe and help each other in our devotional life. So that's the best thing, is just to live in the society of devotees where everyone can have some kind of work, because that's why Varnashram is so important, because everyone has got different propensities, different abilities and talents, and different weaknesses and strengths. So in Varnashram, all these can be provided for. It can be like facilitated. So that's why some devotees may be good at one thing and some devotees may be good at another thing. Some devotees may be good at preaching, some at organising, some at singing, some at cooking. So there's a variety of services that devotees can do, and they can live in association with devotees and at the same time fulfill their needs. And in that way they can avoid the association, bad association. So we don't have to associate with non-devotees, we don't have to associate with people who are, not following any principles. And even if there are people that are pious and well behaved in society, there may be a few well-cultured people, still, if they're not devotees, then it's still bad association, because it can still take us away thinking that, oh, this is a good way of life, but they may not be devotees. So, and we can see here that there was the bad association here from Bharat marriage was a deer. It wasn't even like, people were not following the principles, or, it was just a little baby deer that took him away. So that was his bad association. And so that's why we have to be in the association of devotees and helping each other not fall victim to these temptations that come our way. And actually, Srila Prabhupada gave us a very simple process, compared to the previous rituals, services that people did, like meditation, yagyas, deity worship. Everything has so many rituals and procedures and so much austerity, but we've got the process of bhakti, which is much simpler, and it's for example, kirtan is a simple process. It doesn't require a lot of austerity and so many austerities and sacrifices. It's a very simple process, and because we find it difficult to think of Krishna because of our anarthas in our heart, so that's the best, simplest way of purifying our heart is through kirtan and the process of bhakti. And so we have to see in our own personal life, when we're not doing service, when we're not doing physical service, then where does our mind go to? When we have a gap, where does it go to? Does it start thinking of sense gratification? Does it start thinking of, what does it start thinking of? Because we need to train our mind to think of Krishna always. So as soon as there's a gap, then we should fill it with some Krishna conscious activity or Krishna conscious thoughts. And so we need to remember to put Krishna in the center. And we have to perfect our life by taking to Krishna consciousness. So it means that if we start mixing with non-devotees, or we start to absorb their mentality, then that becomes a setback for us. Then that will influence our or cause us problems in our spiritual life. Because if we start developing the mentality of non-devotees, then either through reading their books or associating with them, then it can cause problems. So that's why there's always this danger, because now there's this thing about indirect preaching, the bridge preaching, and sometimes devotees, to help, so with this preaching strategy, they dress like non-devotional clothes. They start to talk with non-devotees in a casual way, a non-devotional way, and in that way they start becoming more and more involved, so that people will accept us as nice people. But then it may take us away, because we may start absorbing their mentality, and it can influence us that way. So we have to be careful, because we can start becoming like them by associating with them. So there has to be a line. We have to draw a line, how far we want to go with this preaching. So So we have to see we have to recognize what are our strengths and our weaknesses, and try to mold our life so that we can do the best we can for Krishna. Whatever service we've got, we can do our best, and not strive to be for an unrealistic aim. We have to recognize where we stand. Because Krishna has given us all different abilities and propensities, so that we can serve him and be satisfied. So that's the real consideration: how we can serve Krishna and live in the society of devotees. And so, in dealing with Bharat Maharaj's situation, then because he was feeling compassion for the deer, he was thinking that he could look after the deer, because he felt that he was obliged to do that, thinking that that's actually more important to think of others' welfare than our own. But unless our compassion raises somebody from this material platform to the spiritual platform, then it can actually spoil our spiritual advancement. Like here, Bharat Maharaj, he couldn't do so much for the deer. I mean, how much Krishna consciousness can you give to a deer? You maybe can give the deer some prasad or something, but unless it comes to the human platform, it's not going to be able to be Krishna conscious, really. So he was spending so much of his time thinking he can protect the deer, but actually what would have been better would have been for him to let the deer go to find its own food, because the deer became so dependent on Bharat Maharaj that when Bharat Maharaj died, then the deer wouldn't know how to even get his own food. He wouldn't know how to act with other deer, interact with other deer or anything. So in one sense, it was actually worse for the deer that Bharat Maharaj was looking after it. Because the deer could have gone to the forest, it could have met some other deer in the forest and could have learned how to, fend for itself and, stay in a group of deer. But now it became so dependent on Bharat Maharaj that if anything happened to Bharat Maharaj, then the deer would be lost as well. It wouldn't have any hope to survive. It wouldn't even know how to get its own food. So in that sense, it wasn't actually such a compassionate. It seemed like compassion, but it wasn't actually compassion, because now the deer is going to be struggling without him. And Bharat Maharaj neglects his own sadhana by being compassionate to the deer. So it led to distraction from his meditation. So Bharat Maharaj unnecessarily got entangled by this attachment to deer, and that's why it kind of caused him to fall down into the body of a deer. So that's a very graphic casting to show how dangerous it is to, be tempted by any triggers. And it wasn't even such a very, massive temptation. It was just a little deer, an insignificant baby deer, and it distracted him from such a great elevated state of devotional service. I don't know if anyone has any comments or.
Thanks. Next one. Just wanted to ask a question about, you're speaking about we should be careful to be realistic in the service we offer. So it seems like there has to be some kind of balance, because how do we know whether we're being realistic or the mind is placing limitations on us? And at the same time, on the other side, we've got someone who's thinking that Krishna is ability, so we can do the impossible. Perhaps we don't do much practical. So what's the answer to that? The balance between being realistic and also still being able to go beyond the limits of what our mind is dictating.
That's why we need some spiritual authority to help us, some guidance, and we may have our thoughts and desires to do certain things, but knowing our nature and being realistic, how much, yes, Krishna is the ability in man and he can empower us to do anything really. But do we have the faith? Do we have the faith to be able to do that? And do we have are we falling to that extent? Are we that surrender to Krishna that he will empower us to do that? And also it's best to follow authority, because then you're following some sort of, you're not just listening to your own mind thinking that I can do this or I can do that. And it's actually safer for us to follow authority, especially in spiritual life, then we know we're being directed in the right way. Because we're supposed to be following Guru Shastra and Sadhu, not our mind. So in that way, we can be kept in line. And of course, within that service, we can be empowered to do amazing things. If we are authorized to do that service, then Krishna can empower us to do it. But if we're doing it independently, then it may not work.
Bhagavad Gita is based on that, isn't it? Prescribed duty to do prescribed duty. As far as I understand, it's prescribed duty is devotion service, and it's not, it isn't.
Yeah, the spiritual master can give us that the service that's most suited to us, or our temple authorities can give us a service that's most suited to us, so that we can do it to the best of our ability. Like, if somebody can't sing, there's no point making them a kirtan singer, like they're not going to be able to do the best they can for the Lord's service. Or if somebody doesn't know how to cook, and we put them in the kitchen, then they're not going to be able to cook to the best service. They can't offer the best service to the Krishna, So we want to offer the best service to Krishna. So everyone's got different capabilities and talents and abilities, and that's what Varnashram's all about. Is everyone can fit into in some way and do the best they can in their service to Krishna. And for example, like some people may be very good at organizing things, but they may not be good at preaching, so they're best to organize and let somebody else preach, or some people may be really good with people. It's best that they deal with guests, and somebody who's not, they don't deal with guests. So it's like we have to try to do the best for the preaching as well. I don't know if I've answered my question.
It's a good point also about putting faith, because if they are maybe that one devotee is doing too much, and I have to be told, okay, you need to take a little back seat here, you're doing too much for your physical or mental capability. Another one maybe not doing enough. So Prabhupada wanted Krishna consciousness society to be based on love and trust, then that's what Prabhupada wants us to do. If we don't put that love and trust in there, then we have to question whether we're actually following what Prabhupada wants us to do.
Yeah. And also when it's talking about compassion, then we also have to have compassion upon ourselves. It's not just upon others, but we have compassion, because if we don't have compassion on ourselves, then we're not going to be able to show compassion to others. We're not going to know how to. So we need to kind of balance our own life and take care of our own self. So that's part of like being able to help others. We have to help ourselves. A drowning man can't help save anybody else from drowning. So we need to look after our own health and sadhana, and be able to do our service nicely to inspire others to do it as well.
I think sometimes individuals want their freedom, and then mix that with some kind of idea of devotion service. But my experience is that if you adhere to authority and you utilize the freedom you've got, then Krishna gives you more freedom to act in the service. And then obviously there's also true realms that if we misuse our freedom,
Yeah, because like we all have free will, so if we have some time, we can misuse that time in doing unnecessary things or non-devotional things. So we need to be very careful that we don't get caught up thinking I've got some time now and now how to spend it. And if we don't know how to spend our time, then that's why we need some help to kind of organise our life so we can use our time efficiently, so that, we can fill in Krishna conscious in those gaps so we don't misuse that time.
How do you know someone's intelligent? And he said, there's two men. One man was asked another one, are you intelligent? He started looking in his pockets. What do you do? He said, I'm looking to see if there's any money, because money in my pockets and I'm intelligent. So when I'm taking that, what you were saying there is that time is more valuable than money. So if we never have any time, it means we're not very intelligent. Therefore, it's good to actually take instruction from someone else who can help us better use our time. There's always room for improvement, no matter how. When you see in the corporate world, even though there's businesses which are extremely successful and efficient, they're always looking for ways to improve their efficiency.
And also, like, that's one of the symptoms of somebody who's advancing is that they don't like to waste time. So any time they have, they utilize it in some Krishna conscious activity. Either if there is time, we can read Prabhupada's books, we can try to have discussions and sanghas with devotees. We have to fill the gaps in with some Krishna conscious discussions or activities, or some Krishna consciousness, not mundane things.
If one has free time, using that Krishna conscious one thing, and Krishna conscious which is going to be beneficial for herself and their purposes in this life. Sometimes you give somebody enough rope, then hang themselves with it. So sometimes it's not good for somebody to have too much time in their hands, because they're going to have to use it properly. And therefore, especially in the beginning stage of devotional service, then the Bhakti program, for example, then devotees, they're quite pretty much like shepherded like sheep, because they don't know what to do with their time. They have so much time before the cage is on, and so we have to be trained quite vigilantly, so we know how to use time and become regulated. But then it seems like also there's a mistake there. After we become regulated, then we become lax again, and still thinking we're on a higher regulated platform. Going back again, just like trying to walk up an escalator which is going down. As soon as you stop, and you just start going down again, you don't stay in the same place.
Yeah, that's why. It's you wanted to say something?
I was just wondering, one was the comment, one was a question. The comment was Mahara was saying that they did in California, they did research on people that done a forgiveness course, and the ones who were able to be more efficient, their sales increased by 400%. So it's interesting that efficiency is linked with your level of happiness. The question was, we were talking about what a person is good at doing. So Krishna says, even if the person does someone else's duty perfectly, it's not as good as doing his own duty, even though it's imperfect. But I was just wondering, because the tendency is to think, well, if someone's really good at something, that must be what his propensity is, that's how he should be engaged. But that may not necessarily be what his duty should be. Just because he's good at something. Like he may be really good at cooking, but if he's looking in the pot all the time and relishing it, and somebody else may be a terrible cook, but he's trying to do it for Krishna. So sometimes it could be hard to gauge. Just because the person's capable of doing something doesn't necessarily mean that's what he should be doing.
Well, I was thinking that verse means something like, a Brahmana trying to become a Kshatriya or something like that. Like Arjuna wanted to give up fighting so he could go to the forest and meditate because he wanted to avoid fighting. But Krishna's saying, no, that's not good. You know, you're a Kshatriya. You know, even if you could perform that perfectly, like a Brahmana in the forest, still, it's more important that you do your fighting, do your duty. I just assume that's part of Krishna's trying to get Arjuna to do.
You have to be quite deep when you're trying to analyse the person, because you may see the person be very good at something, maybe really good at singing, but it may be to keep him out of harm's way, not to do that because it's going to become deviating by it.
I don't know if you-
I think it comes back to the same point. Both points are valid, is that it's about prescribed duty. Because someone maybe materially expects something and we've seen in the past that someone's level of the same Shastra actually that materialistic people consider advancement in terms of spiritual material ability. So it's not necessarily because somebody's good at something they're a materialist, and it's not necessarily because they're good at something they're spiritually advanced. If it's their perspective, if somebody's good at something and the authority says, okay, you do that, and allows the person to continue doing it, it means it's not affecting the person adversely, they're not becoming proud or contentious or whatever. Or maybe so many considerations like if they don't allow them to do that, they won't do anything else. These considerations, so it becomes a perspective for one reason or another. Or it may be that to keep something, as what we were saying, that to keep somebody out of harm's way, they may not get to do something really bad because it might be bad for their spiritual life. They may become puffed up and start becoming self-proclaimed authority and putting people down. So who's engaging that has to think is what's best for the spiritual life. And sometimes the mission has to suffer for that because people may have abilities but can't do it within the time.
It's a hard one because, yeah. So that's why, you know, we may have many talents and we may think that we can do something else better, but it's better to be authorized to do our service and then we can get, because it's also part of purification. We may not be good at doing something and we have to do it, and then we have to depend on Krishna, so we have to give up our own thinking that we're the doer. So it can purify us from that propensity thinking that we're the doers.
Many times you see Prabhupada would float the boat in the deep end, stop the train in Delhi, take it out of the centre. And you often find in this storm that you will be finding yourself in the deep end and depend on Krishna. It's also good that we have Jagannath. She wasn't an artist and Prabhupada told the people for Krishna. So if somehow we find ourselves in a situation where we have to do something which is totally out of our field of experience or knowledge or comfort zone, and it's forcing us to surrender because then we have to approach someone with devotee who knows about that and say, oh, we haven't got a clue what we're doing here, can you give me some direction? So that can be very good for our humility, and Krishna wants us to experience something else because he may want us to do something else down the road, so he's putting various types of experiences there for us so we can use them for the ones to do something even better.
Yeah, and we may have to do so many different services, the time, circumstance, and place. We have to do the needful, so we may have to be a jack of all trades. We have to do, may not be our propensity to do this or that, but because it's needed, then we do it. And so that's also surrender, isn't it?
Yeah, and that would be also, isn't it, the more the work is more rigorous, sense that their work is all in all. You can't see it beyond that. So devotion service, we have to be open to change, open to new experiences.
Yeah, and also in devotional service, we get a chance to do so many different types of services. So actually, you know, we're actually very fortunate we get a chance to be able to increase our ability in so many fields, and that we'd never think of doing, that we'd never ever even thought that we could do. So Krishna can empower us to do so many different things. So it's actually more, we get more chance to do different things.
I think it comes down to surrendering to the basics. When people are instruction as to how to do the basics, like chanting, you know, type of chant, chant with everything else. You know, how to read, how to read, following regulation, things like that. And then from that, it can develop them, because that kind of regulation, basic sadhana is a foundation which everything is built on.
Yeah, without that, without the sadhana, then, you know, whatever we're doing isn't going to have the same effect. It's not going to be like, we won't be able to do it to the utmost ability that we can do. We'll not be able to focus properly on what we're doing if our sadhana's not there.
Forget what I'm doing.
Yeah, and also it'll just become a mundane material activity eventually, because it'll just be mechanical. It won't have like the same spiritual foundation behind it, why we're doing it, how, you know, it's to please Krishna. The whole point of everything we're doing is to please Krishna. So if we're doing it mindlessly, then it just becomes a mechanical activity, because devotional activity means that it's actually done with devotion. It's actually, you're trying to do it to please Krishna. It's not just some like, you know, physical work. It's actually a devotional, it's actually service.
Seems to me, actually, that's seen in more temples rather than the other temples that they actually have a mechanical device for kirtan, which bangs is gone. And whether there's anybody in the temple, or whether there's not, just switches the machine on, it just doesn't be wrong for the artery.
Yeah, because it's just like, you know, Krishna's interested in our devotion, so, you know, it's not just the mechanics of it. You know, we could have a robot on the altar doing the arti. What use is that? Because it's like Krishna's not interested in the mechanics; he's interested in the devotion. So, you know, anything we're doing, you know, a robot could do it, but that's the whole point, is that we're doing it. We're trying to do it with devotion. Otherwise, it'll just become robotic, and that's not actually what's going to attract Krishna. So,
You have fun doing like 1 minute a day, 10 hours a day, and then usually it's what you've done with devotion.
yeah, I mean, it's the whole point of everything we're doing is to increase our devotion to Krishna. And initially, it may not be very devotional, because we're, you know, we're trying to physically do things to please Krishna. But eventually, it has to be the mind. You know, it's like the body. We're trying to do the right things with our body in service to Krishna. Then our speech. You know, we're trying to say the right things. But then eventually we have to control the mind and think the right things, because we could be doing all the physical work and speaking the right things, but our mind could be elsewhere. So eventually we have to control the mind and bring that in a devotional way towards Krishna. You know, we have to think of Krishna. So,
So the beginning mechanics have to be out at least, isn't it?
Yeah.
So at least we're
yeah,
using the working senses and knowledge acquiring senses in Christian service.
Yeah.
And then the mind will catch up with it.
Yeah.
Seems like it's a bit like when you travel, somewhere you travel to the Holy Land, they say that your mind eventually
Yeah.
catches up with you.
yeah,
So it seems like we've made a decision sometimes that we're going to be a devotee, so we start doing the mechanics of it, and then in due course the mind is purified and it catches up with it.
yeah. First,
Some say that we have to do it as if by force.
yeah. In the beginning, it is sad. That's what sadhana bhakti is like. At the very beginning, it's like we have to force ourselves to get up in the morning, force ourselves to be clean and chant and do the service. You know, so at least externally we have to do the right things, but eventually that will affect, you know, the internal, the mind. You know, and we'll start thinking the right things. We'll start speaking the right things. But if we're not even doing the right things physically, then mentally we're not going to be able to.
sometimes people think that, and what you say then, if someone says, well, I don't think I should be forced to do anything.
Well, devotional service is voluntary, but if people want to join the ashram, then they're obliged to do certain things, because that's part of being in an ashram. Prabhupada says, no lazies, no crazies. So ashram life means that rules and regulations, sadhana, that's what ashram life's about. And if people are not interested in following rules and regulations and, performing austerity, then they shouldn't be living in an ashram, because that's what ashram life's for.
How is it like when you join the army? You make a decision beforehand and then when you sign up, you can't do it yourself, well, go for a march. You've already signed up for it, this is what you expect to do.
Yeah, because there's so many other organisations that don't follow so many rules and regulations. Most of the organisations are like that. They're not like any real, strict rules and regulations in sadhana or diet or anything. But if people want to join, the ashram, then they have to accept all the rules and regulations that are in ashram life. So that's why in general there's not so many monks in the world. They don't live in like ashrams and temples.
Seems like we forget because we get inspired to join and we see the need for those regulations, etc. That actually there's a goal for this, but then somehow we get forgetful of why we started doing it. So how do we always remember and focus on what goals when we're struggling with trying to just keep the basic regulations together?
See the question again.
Yeah, so we can at some point in our life we make an intelligent decision to become a devotee, and we realise this is part of the package, and we should do this, we should do that, and we have our purpose, which is basically to develop love of Godhead, Krishna Prema, to be a pure devotee, to get into your world, stuff like that. And then in the process of putting into practice the regulation of devotional service, we tend to forget the goal, we so caught up in the struggle with the practice. So how can we rise above that struggle and remember what the goal is?
Well, we need the Devotees Association to remind us of that, what our purpose is, what our goal is, because we may get caught up in all the little things that we're supposed to do and forget sight of the goal. And usually if there is a goal in mind, if we're going somewhere, then we usually try to get there as fast as possible, and there's usually urgency. But if we don't have any goal, if we don't even know where we're going, then we're not going to be really urgent about it. We're not going to be trying to get there as fast as possible, and we'll end up getting distracted by all sorts of things on the way. So if we have the goal in mind, we know this is our goal and we have to reach that. So all these other things, they won't become so difficult, because we know the goal is there and we want to reach that goal. It's just like, in mundane life, even like, you have these athletes, and their goal is that they want to be the winner, and they do everything they possibly can to reach that goal. They'll work hard, they'll train themselves, they'll do all these running competitions and everything so they can, whatever it is, because that's their goal and nothing else matters to them, so they do everything they possibly can to reach that goal. So we've got the highest goal, we want to go back to Godhead, so at least we should become really urgent and think, this is my goal and I've only got so much time in this life, so let's get on with it.
I was just reading in St. Capital Completely, and there's 4 aspects to making of that, and the most important one, the one he deals with in the book, is St. Capital, which means to commit.
The determination, isn't it?
Man was saying, so that's why we make vows, because when you come they went to Prabhupada and said, don't make them follow the vows anymore. Then Prabhupada said, what you promised, and he said, yeah, seriously, then you'll be empowered to follow. But if you don't commit, if you're kind of, stepping back at the same time, the Christian doesn't step into help. That's how the dynamic of the Sankhalpa works. If the Christian is prepared to help, if you're prepared to put your neck out, push yourself to do it.
Yeah, we have to make the effort, and then we get Krishna's mercy. But if we don't even put the effort in, and we think, well, let Krishna do it all, then it's not going to happen. It's not going to work. So we have to at least put in the effort we can, and then we can depend on Krishna for his mercy. And there has to be some determination. Like that's what it says in the Nectar instruction. There has to be enthusiasm, confidence, patience. This is determination to do everything that we need to do to reach our goal. And we shouldn't think, oh, we'll never reach it. We shouldn't be negative in any way, because we have a process that's outlined for us, and we can get help in our society. We're not on our own. We're not living outside in the forest like Bharat Maharaj. We've got association of devotees. We've got Prabhupada's books. We've got senior Vaishnavas that we can approach. So we've got so much, we can get so much input to help us in our spiritual life. So we shouldn't feel any negativity. And we can save ourselves from becoming distracted by insignificant things, trivial things. And we can learn from the lesson of Bharat Maharaj how easy it was for him to get distracted from such a goal. He had his goal. He was nearly reaching his goal. He was experiencing the love of God, the preliminary stages of love of God, but still he'd got distracted, from that. So it must have been, as the Charya says, past life karma. So temptations might come our way from our past life that we're not even aware of, that we don't even know that are going to come. So we have to be on our guard and just remember, whenever there is some sort of temptation, this is a temptation, this is Maya trying to tempt me, so let me become more Krishna conscious, or take shelter. Like somebody, Prabhupada said that, Maya is troubling us with so many different things, then we just take shelter of Krishna, and then Maya will go away. Krishna, he can, protect us from that. So the point is, we have to become very vigilant, and we have to pray for protection. Even Prabhupada prayed for protection from the deities, So that, and he's a Paramahamsa. So what about us? So we definitely have to pray. And like Prabhupada says, the problem with his disciples is they're not afraid of Maya. They're not afraid enough of Maya. So we're not actually seeing how Maya's distracting us most of the time. And it may be silly little things, like internet or Facebook, or, small things like that just become more and more distracting. And then we lose sight of what we're supposed to be doing, and we get caught up in all these social medias, and, it's a very big distraction. And that's why we have to be careful we don't get caught up. Like the phone is now the greatest distraction, isn't it? The phone, the internet, that's our greatest distraction now. So previously we didn't have that problem because we didn't have internet. We just read books and we just, did this, but now it's becoming a big distraction. It's helpful as well, but it can also distract us. So it's important to kind of be wary that, we shouldn't be wasting so much time on social media and on our phone, and it's not healthy for us either. Should I stop there? No. Okay. Thank you for all the discussion. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, ISKCON Guruvir ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaur Premanand.